Hello and welcome to another edition of My View from the Piano Bench. If you have followed me for a while, you'll know that not too long ago, this stream was called, actually I'm calling it a stream, it's a pre-recorded video now, Inside the Process. This is a continuation of that, but with a little bit of a slant now, more to my daily experiences and thoughts that gives me, and hopefully the things that I have to say will be of value or interest to musicians and non-musicians alike. Can I speak to everyone at once? I always try, which hopefully doesn't mean I talk out of both sides of my mouth. Thank you to those of you who support and encourage me via the links available on the support page of my website. We're able to continue. I say we, I guess that's my multiple personality disorder. I was writing an email to someone today saying, yes, in the one-person business, a one-man operation, I'm the department head of every department. So maybe it is a we. But this allows me to continue. You know, it's a modest thing, but it's a very worthwhile thing for me, and I hope it is for you. So if you are inclined to encourage me, look at the Patreon. It's basically like a recurring tip jar, and you'll see what's involved with that. Thanks so much. So the topic for tonight is grateful for everything, which is very helpful in a business such as the music business. A friend of mine used to say, it's a horrible business. I like the playing part. True, but I don't put that particular spin on it, although it's very easy to, because it can be a very horrible business. What I wrote here, I was a little more charitable. I said, being a musician is a tricky business. And we do know that it doesn't make sense for us to choose this. We do it for reasons other than most would evaluate to choose a profession. This is not so much a profession, it's a life, as you know or easily can imagine. And in this life of a musician, there is a lot of uncertainty, a ton of disappointments, and you can easily and often have challenging and stupid situations to deal with. Yep, nothing like it. Ha! then you have to decide, okay, you really messed up the last head, the last melody chorus of that tune, really badly. Badly enough to stop this and start over? No, we'll live with it. Because there's nothing like it. Oh my goodness. But then, and actually this is what I just said is a good prelude into it. In addition to being a ridiculous business that we're not into because it's a business, but we have to make it that because we need to eat, right? The music making itself can include all the things I said before about the business and more. And the discouragement that you can easily have as a musician is that you become so aware of your shortcomings that you can't appreciate what's going on, at least not enough. And it's that kind of paradox that you likely have heard me talk about before, that the deeper you get into the creative space, your artistic temperament, or I would say spirituality, when you're really there, you are aware of so much more than you were before, which makes the gap between you and what you could envision yourself being, what you would hope to be, and eventually what you know you'll never be, bigger and bigger and bigger. A friend of mine, how does he put it? No matter how good you get, you still suck. I wouldn't put it that way, but that's my friend Bruce, who coined the term hidden bummer factor. And it's something that we do have to deal with. And in the earlier stages of playing the piano, beginner, intermediate stages, or just being a musician, when you encounter that, you're actually surprised because you just feel like, well, I'm getting better and it feels better and I'm better. But then you start thinking, I might think I'm worse. What you are worse than is the higher goalposts that you can now see because some of that fog is lifted. Someday I'll talk about, in fact, I'm going to write this down because I had some really cool experiences on a string of duo gigs that I did for many years. And I'm writing down the words Sullivan's Steakhouse. I think they've changed their policy, but for their first at least decade, maybe 2 decades, for a long time, they ran music every night. It was in the bar, an upscale steakhouse chain, and they had jazz. It was all jazz musicians. Now, their theme was the older swing era jazz. But what would wind up happening is that the person who would book the gig would be a more contemporary jazz guy, and it would just become jazz in general. But it was an old school kind of Louis Jordan-ish vibe that they played through the house system. And in the rotation of the Sullivans, the main Sullivans that I worked at, often several nights a week for a long time, I was the most old school guy there, which is typically the case with jazz musicians anywhere. If I'm hanging around them or I'm part of a band or something, I'm often I don't want to say token, but I'm often the one with the most old school sensibilities, which I can make work. But in that environment, you could say that I was the guy who fit in the best to the original company conception. And my friend Bruce, we did those as duo gigs for a long time. Started out as me playing solo, and I spent dozens, if not hundreds, of wonderful gigs with my friend Bruce Kaminsky, talking about all sorts of things, waxing esoterically philosophical. Him saying things like, remember, common sense isn't all that common and doesn't usually make sense, or something like that. So I can be a creature of routine, in case you haven't noticed. So when I do a recurring gig, I typically have like a song I always start with. So this has nothing to do with the theme other than thinking about Bruce reminded me that every gig, every night I was there, I would start with Out of Nowhere. You came along from out of nowhere. And that makes me thirsty, go figure. All right. So we all have to deal with, if we're professional musicians, the ridiculousness of the business, but then the ups and downs and sometimes genuine trauma of making music and learning and growing and making connections and all of that stuff. And we deal with it according to the type of person we are, of course. And this is related to me often saying, and if you've been around me for more than 5 minutes, you've heard me say this, that musicians who play music will express their temperament. You can learn a whole lot about somebody pretty much everything you need to know if you're attuned to it by how they play music. We can't, if we're truly expressing, it's coming from us. And if you're the sensitive type, you're likely to feel overwhelmed or struggle with that sense of being overwhelmed or overburdened. If you're not the sensitive type, you could be descending into self-satisfaction, insensitivity, being kind of overly self-satisfied. And this is general now, I'm not just talking about music. You know, depending on what kind of person we are, will dictate how we react to things. But neither of those things are healthy. And how do we get healthy in that regard? Well, it really has to do with our relationship to our ego, right? So why do we do this? Why do musicians put themselves through all of this? Well, because we know that moment that we can step into. I was going to say that we can create, but a better way of putting it would be that we can step into. And in a lot of regards, we live for that, to be in that moment, to be in that place. Now, some might also say the show business angle of it, you know, to be on the stage and the exhilaration and all of that. This is a detour I wasn't planning to take. Let's see if it's stupid or not. Some of you know that when I was much younger, before I succumbed to being a musician, my little dream was to be a professional bowler. And that was the one sort of anomaly. Actually, two of my childhood. The second was being an Eagle Scout, which is probably actually the first anomaly. But the second one was being a bowling alley rat, which comes out of the military culture that I came up in, because I was the only child of a career Marine. Once a Marine, always a Marine. And I'll still call random people sir, you know, guys, when I see them and stuff like that. People assume I used to serve, but I took the advice when I was like 10 years old of a young sergeant who came up to me when I was at work with my dad after he saw my dad had left, because my dad was top, he was in charge. And then that young sergeant put his arm around me, looked at me and said, "Whatever you do, son, don't enlist." And he walked away, and I took his advice. So, boy, that was a detour. But I was talking about bowling because here, yeah. So in recent months, maybe the last couple of years, I've kind of rediscovered or reconnected with the Professional Bowlers Tour in terms of, you know, watching. I don't watch much television, but, you know, and I like watching, you know, the old school guys that I was fixed by, I was glued to when I was a kid. You know, and I was a teenager in the 70s, you know, when an old timer at the time like Dick Weber would make the Saturday afternoon telecast, I'd be all excited, right? Of course, Dick Weber's long gone, and his son Pete Weber is pretty much retired because he's my age. So, but where was I going? I know where I was going. So, a few weeks ago, a young bowler named Kevin won his first championship. Kevin also is trying his hand in the music business. Now, I'm saying the music business, this is going to sound pejorative or nasty against Kevin, don't mean that. But the music business is different from the craft of being a musician. And ideally, they converge, but music business is all about business. So he's got his hip hop single or stuff he's doing, right? And when he won his first championship, and he was very emotional, and he said, "This is what athletes and entertainers live for." because he was so overwhelmed at the end, because it's a very big deal in bowling to get your first victory on the professional tour, because all of a sudden now a lot of the barriers that were there for you and all the little hoops you have to jump through, you can get exempt from, so your life kind of changes, as best as I understand it. So he was just purely exuberant. But it's like to be in that situation and to have it all on the line and put yourself out there. It was interesting to hear him say that. But no matter who you are, what you do, if you're in the public eye, you are a performer, even if you don't consider yourself that. I struggled with that when I was working down at the Showboat Atlantic City when I first went down there. And I didn't like the idea. This is going to sound stupid. But I didn't like the idea that I was working for the entertainment department, because I wasn't seeing what I was doing as entertainment. I was a serious musician, or just a ridiculous, overgrown kid. I think that's still true. But anyway, why do we do this? To be in that moment. I wouldn't express it for myself in exactly the same way that Kevin does, but I certainly get it, and it's all related to that. For me, it's to experience the connection and to enjoy it, beyond or in spite of the potholes that are all there to fall into. And that's kind of the point, really, to separate those things, which is very difficult to do. You have the purpose to do it, and you have to put yourself in a particular place internally to do it. But it's a very healthy thing to do, especially if you're in ridiculous or unpleasant or less than ideal circumstances, right? But talking about the ego now, it's very easy to judge others or yourself. And that judgment is a roadblock, like this is to me, to that creative process. And so a healthy relationship with your ego is really, really essential to get past it. And a lot of that is just appreciating those things that are there to be appreciated. Because you can't take them away. Well, I mean, you can take them away from yourself, actually, but I think you know what I'm saying. They can't take that away from me, but I can easily lose my grip on just about anything, including that. No, that was all right. So, a healthy relationship with your ego when you're coming up as a musician will from time to time involve some shock therapy. Whether you, if you're a musician, a young musician, throw yourself into a situation like attend a jam session with everybody there who's more advanced than you, which is a great idea, even though you're going to feel you come out humiliated because you really get schooled in a positive way. You know, if that's how you challenge yourself, or when I was 17 years old and I was challenged to listen to Art Tatum, which until my trumpet teacher told me about, I wasn't even aware of. He asked me, "What do you think about Art Tatum?" And I said, "Huh?" He said, "You think you're going to be a jazz pianist? You don't know Art Tatum, go buy a record." And the irony of it was that the record I bought, called Piano Starts Here, I think the tunes were recorded in 1933 when Tatum himself was 17 years old. And I will tell you, that was devastating. But for now, the musicians today that might do that to people, Corey Henry or others, are going to be different, most likely, because Art Tatum is certainly a product of the past, but a product of the culture that I came up in. Even if Art Tatum died before I was born, he drank himself to death, which is not uncommon in that realm, unfortunately. But for older musicians like me, being just stunned and disabled by Art Tatum is part of the rite of passage if you're a pianist. And the story is that Oscar Peterson uh, was given an Art Tatum record by his father because his father thought that he was getting a little too full of himself. And after trying to convince his father that that was really two piano players, not one, you can't fool me, Dad, and he found out it was one. And according to Oscar, he didn't play for a month. I just didn't play for a week. But then I finally got past it. But then as you develop a more mature relationship with your ego, what was demoralizing is now inspiring until you allow it to become demoralizing again. But I certainly see myself, and I don't listen to as much Tatum these days, but if I were, I'd have the same relationship to it as of other piano players who would devastate me if my ego was going to be that way. And I'm just appreciating it. But taking yourself out of it, it's a complicated thing because that ego, that self is woven into everything. Now, I'm getting just a little ahead of myself. That you might kind of understand how the title fits in here. Be grateful for everything, or grateful for everything. But I'm actually going to specifically get there. But before I do, because I always take detours and winding roads and curveballs and stuff, one of the tunes that was on that Oscar recording, Art Tatum recording, was T for Two. Humoresque, the Dvorak melody was also there. And I had no prayer of ever pulling off the T for Two the way Tatum did it. But when I was younger, I tried to play the humorous thing, kind of the way Tatum did it. Because his hands were twice as big as mine, probably. And I don't have the chops. So I'm not going to play T for Two. I'll go with that one, the way Tatum did it. I'm just going to play it the way I do it because that's me, and that's the only person I can be, right? ago. When I think of something, I write it down. And then I can't read what I write, so I don't remember it anyway. So, Kenny Warner, who's a very important figure in contemporary jazz, and well beyond that as well, for the things that he is doing that reach well beyond jazz and music in his Effortless Mastery curriculum and series. It's been around now for decades. And his line is that you need to learn to love yourself for sounding bad, because you need to get past your fear of sounding bad or fear of not sounding good. And that's when you put yourself in your own way to manage to make sure that you sound good as you're defining sounding good. Makes sense? And as opposed to allowing it to happen and appreciating whatever happens, letting it play through you. Appreciating the artist in you, not directing the artist in you, which of course implies that you have to work to become an artist. So it's actually not effortless at all, except when you are applying it. And it needs to be effortless to truly be mastery, if that makes sense. Now, let's see why I wrote this. Yes. So he talks about letting it play through you, detaching from ego. And if you go to my Facebook musician page, and some of you follow that, probably most of you, but if not, it's the Joe Holt page. It says musician. And I came across a little clip from Kenny the other day, maybe 2 days ago now, and he just says it perfectly in less than a minute. And I would encourage you to look at it. I started transcribing, just writing down exactly what he said. I was going to read it to you, but in part because a couple of the words I wasn't exactly sure what he was saying, because he was kind of seated across the room. I figure I'll just encourage you to take a look at it. Now, here's the part about thankful or grateful for everything. And I'm going to get a little bit... Okay. There's going to be a religious reference here. And it's something, I don't want to say that I avoid. What I always purpose to do is speak in terminology that everybody can grab onto and throw the lasso around the room, and all of that. Not change anything, but just be aware of who's around me, whether I'm speaking or playing. And sometimes, of course, I get that done better than others. But the best way I can share this with you is to actually tell you my specific, for lack of a better word, process, which involves something that the Apostle Paul wrote in one of the letters, and I forget actually the reference now. I should have looked it up. It's a common reference if you are of the Christian persuasion. Rejoice always, pray without ceasing, in everything give thanks. Little 3-step program there. And years ago, it dawned on me that actually defines the process, but in reverse. Because to rejoice always, unless you're contriving that, not going to come from here. Pray without ceasing. Well, I mean, your mind's going to wander. You got a life, right? So what? In everything, give thanks. Be grateful for everything. And this is sort of my own angle on where Kenny Warner is coming from. Because if you can be genuinely grateful for something, no matter how bad it is, then you are positioning yourself to not be in your own way, not needing to control it. yes, there's a certain element of faith here. You can apply that very generally. Boy, I couldn't pronounce that very well, could I? But not specific faith. When you pay attention to Kenny, he's talking about things outside of ourselves that we connect to and trust, right? And we can develop that trust, just like trusting your intuition, trusting your gut. You know you can trust your gut, and then everybody second guesses their gut, and then realizes I should have trusted my gut. You know, there's something about all that, but being thankful for bad circumstances, an acknowledgement that in the interconnectedness of everything and in whatever path that's on and whatever that's going to create and whatever that's an unpleasant but necessary part of, is ultimately well beyond our understanding. And it's not our purpose to understand or want to understand, but to acknowledge that down the road, there's going to be some relationship with the positive path that bad thing had to do with. And I'm getting a little preachy, but back when Dr. Laura was a thing on the radio, one of her lines that I liked a lot was, "Look, a flower grows in the poop." And that gratefulness is a constructive place to be. And I struggled with that last night, actually, and I'll say that in a minute. So the gratefulness is the embracing, the acceptance, the not needing it to be something. And now I'm going to apply it just to play. I was speaking generally, and it's very problematic to talk about it generally, because you're going to get the what about suffering, what about this, and what about that. Big picture, big picture, big picture. Don't be cynical. Don't be judgmental. Be trusting. Be in that space. But I'm applying that specifically now to the piano, because that's what we're talking about. And not knowing what's going to happen, and whatever happens, you just embrace, even if you want to cringe. That's quite difficult, right? And if you watch that Facebook post that I shared from Kenny, you'll see he's talking about that exact same thing in a slightly different way. So there is a fork in the road, whether to embrace or whether to, not. Okay, well, whether to be thankful or not. And in playing, we need to be in that positive space where we're not making the judgments on our ego. So a starting place would be accentuate the positive. And of course, the instantly humiliating thing is that you've heard me not do that all over the place in this series with things that will come out of my mouth, including what's come out of my mouth earlier today. So that idea of being in that detached place is the struggle for all of us, and hopefully one that we take up and we find a path, a process, a procedure, a direction in which to pursue that. And for me, right here, everything I ever needed to know in life, I learned at the piano. Someday I will write that book. So last night I had a concert, a private concert, and ironically, I did about 20 minutes before what you just saw me do, which is, actually, I didn't intend to tell you what this, but I'm telling you, okay? That little tiny thing is a little caffeinated mint, because I can't get away with drinking coffee. It kills my stomach, and I don't need a lot of caffeine, but sometimes just to think clearly, the amount of caffeine in that mint, it would take me, a small handful to equal a cup of coffee, right? So it's a tiny little thing. But I have learned that can create a barrier to creative play. But it also helps me speak more clearly. It helps me, keep my thoughts in front of me in that regard. Beats taking ADD meds, right? Which I can't do anyway. And I felt like I'm going to do this. And I did it took one like 20, 30 minutes before I had to play, figuring, about the hour, it'll wear itself off. But it was in my mind. And you've heard me say that once you sit down and you start playing, if that space isn't properly open, you can't really pry it open while you're playing. And the whole experience just becomes frustrating. It's a self-perpetuating frustration. And I thought I went through all the right little procedures, but when I'm planning this today, I'm thinking, I really didn't position myself in a place of gratefulness. I positioned myself in the place of being open to be played through, to receive and give, as opposed to construct in my own head. But you can't overestimate the importance of being grateful. And this is a scientific thing too. You see studies about this all the time. Extends your life, increases your mood. So a bit of just general advice. So one more little anecdotal illustration. And I'm going to see if I can do this without giving a name. I did name Art Tatum. He was the jazz pianist I listened to when I was 17 years old, and that threw me into despair. And of course, that gets your ego in the way. It's something to overcome. In recent years, some years ago, a young, prominent jazz pianist and I were in the same space. And he said something, and he wasn't really thinking beyond himself, honestly. He said something that was annoying, egotistical, and a bit of a put down. And probably was not aware of any of that was happening. And for a good while, that actually soured my perception of this guy and got in the way of me enjoying what he does, appreciating what he does, which is amazing stuff. And when I noticed that for real, no, I noticed it before I knew it, but when I really understood how much I was hurting myself was when that wasn't an issue anymore, because that was now out of the path of my ego, and I just get the most immense amount of positivity and benefit from listening to this guy. And so the idea of being annoyed, by somebody can be similar to being brought to despair, by Art Tatum, because you see it in terms of yourself. That's the point, right? You see it in terms of yourself. Now, when I was playing Accentuate the Positive, I think I hit a theme of this a little too hard. This is something I emphasize for myself. Because the idea about being positive and seeing the bright side, glass half full, blah, blah, blah. Yes, but it doesn't mean that you, to me anyway, and I understand this and try to practice it, it's not a comparison shopping thing. It's not where you say, well, other people have it so much worse than me. I'm not, it's not so bad. I'm grateful that it's not so bad. No, I think you actually have to get into embrace exactly what it is to be in that moment with it. But still the advice that any tunes like that give you, On a Sunny Side of the Street or Pennies from Heaven, Accentuate the Positive, Eliminate the Negative, which is not exactly what I was saying, but that's great advice. And if that's how you look at it, go for it. Because I realize what I was saying is a little thick. And sometimes I allow too much thickness to come out of my mouth. So I got one more tune that I'm going to play that you heard me play before. And this is it. Count Your Blessings, right? You know what? I am going to stop that time. Did I play a stupid chord change here? I wasn't thinking. See? I'm sucking on caffeine. Why did I do that to myself? Aha, let's try again. Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.